I had not planned to do any more on the Quran, but I have decided to add one or two more because in reading this book here, Sacred Books of the World, as you see here by Dr. Boquist, he was a world religious figure who wanted to explore all of the religions of the world and get some of it in here so that one could read it and also get his interpretations of it and some other books that he told about by people who have interpreted. So when I came in here and found the Quran, I found it to be probably one of the most interesting sections that I've read on the Quran. And what's interesting, when he quotes the Quran, he takes it from Mr. Bell. Now, the interesting thing is that Richard Bell, or Dr. Richard Bell, rewrote the Quran and translated it, of course, but he did it so that he rearranged the verses, not the surahs, but the verses within them in a different order, which he thought was more correct than the others. So I have that file because I want to see just how he did it, and it's quite interesting, but his translation is also very good. But in this book, what is even more interesting, he pointed to, while he's studying the Quran and talking about Eastern literature, which is Quran and other parts of that kind of Islamic literature, which is in here, what happens is he mentioned a man who he said, everyone who reads about the Quran could take this man's book and read it. He says it's one of the best books on the Quran that there are. Well, his name was Arthur Jeffrey, and he wrote what's called the Quran as Scripture. Now, what's interesting that he wrote that about the Quran as Scripture is that this is in 4 parts, and it's, if you get the file, it's about, say, 66 pages long, so it's quite long. But in the Quran as Scripture, what he does there, he takes the scripture of the Quran, compares it to scripture not only of what we call scripture in Judaism, scripture in Christianity, but scripture also in other types of world religion, just as this one does look at world religion and sees what is their interpretation. What do they mean when they say scripture? Where does it come from? Why is it so important? Why is scripture central to cultures all over the world? They have their own sacred books, as you say, not just the books of the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, but other people, Buddhists, have their books that they consider very sacred as well. So what this book does, which is fascinating, is that section on the Quran as Scripture goes through, and he points out places in here that you can read, and with the notes on the bottom, for instance, of this one, the Clear Quran, and this one, which has even more notes, as you know. When you compare the notes that he suggests you look at in those two, you will find things you wouldn't know about in the Quran before. How Muhammad interpreted what he got, where he got it, where there was stuff before that influenced his thinking. Were there things in God's mind that came to him that is considered the Quran? Was the Quran written before creation began? As some say, the Old Testament was written before creation began and then came down through Moses. Quite fascinating, quite interesting. I suggest this is a very interesting book for anyone who wants something to read.